and welcome to SMNI. You're watching Business and Politics. I'm your host, Dante Klinkang. For the first time on this program, we have a guest appearing for the second time. He is Lito Averia Jr., chairperson of Namfrel, or the National Citizens Movement for Free Elections. If you recall, Mr. Averia is an expert on cybersecurity. He lectures or facilitates talks on that and related topics like data privacy protection, disaster recovery and business continuity, and internet governance. He's also a resource person for the Supreme Court Subcommittee on E-Commerce and is a member of the PNP Anti-Cybercrime Group Advisory Council. For transparency, I should also add that he writes a weekly column for the Manila Times. We invited Mr. Averia today to talk about the recent barangay and Sanguniang Kabataan elections, which media and observers reported were generally peaceful. But there were pockets of violence, incidents of vote buying, and other poll infractions. With that, we will also talk about electoral reform and future elections, particularly about the preparations for 2025. We'll ask him what is Namfrel's assessment of the last elections and what can we learn from it for future polls. Sir Lito Averia, thank you for coming here for the second time.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's been a couple of weeks since we had the BSKE. I believe in Namfrel's initial assessment was that the elections were generally peaceful. We heard similar things from PPCRV. But now that the dust has settled, does your initial assessment hold?
Well, it still holds. In general, it was peaceful and orderly. The conduct of and the execution of the process.
Okay.
So the election workers knew what to do on that day.
Okay.
Right. So, and but of course, no, it was not 100% peaceful because there were areas where anomalies occurred or we observed. For example, election violence. There were shooting incidents that were reported. There were intimidation and harassment incidents that were observed. Okay, so that's the peace and order assessment. But when we do assess the elections, we ask ourselves our questions. You know, was it competitive?
Okay.
Was it free?
Okay.
Was it fair?
Okay.
Right. So those are some of the
those are new metrics that.
These are international metrics.
I see.
Okay. So what we do is we look at, let's say, for example, with competitiveness. There were areas reportedly, as observed by observers, that there were barangays where there was uncontested positions.
Right.
Meaning, there's only one.
No opponent,
Yeah, no opponent for the posts.
Yeah.
Okay, even in the Sanguniang Kabataan elections. One specific example that I can cite is the case of Baguio City.
Okay. Which you were
Yes, I visited them a few weeks before the elections, the election officer in Baguio. And I was told that 16 out of 128 barangays did not have any SK candidates.
Right.
So there was no choice. The youth in Baguio, in those barangays, did not have anybody to choose from.
And we were talking earlier that there are some areas, I said, in the country where there were no candidates at all. I think this was in the SK elections, or
this was in the SK elections specifically. Baguio City is an example.
Okay.
Is an example.
Okay.
In the south, in I think in Basilan.
Okay.
Our observers reported that in the barangay level, there was only uncontested positions again.
Right.
Okay. So competition there was no competition at all.
I was meaning new metrics in a sense that, you know, for the media, I guess for the public, we're always so focused on the violence, the vote buying, and these types of anomalies. But these things that you're bringing up, they matter, right? I mean, was there no opposition or no candidates in some areas because of some manipulation by local politicians, or because there was no interest among the people to run for public office in those areas, or was there something else happening?
In the case of the SK elections, probably it's a result of the anti-dynasty provision in the SK reform law of 2015, where it provides that you cannot run for an SK post if you have relatives up to the second degree of consanguinity or
Right.
affinity.
Right.
That means your father, your mother should not be an incumbent officer in any
Right.
local or national post.
I remember that because our president now, I think, claims credit that when he was a senator, he was one of those who, I think, introduced that particular provision on the anti-dynasty, and he was saying that this
Yes.
was the only law in the Philippines that actually puts that in effect
Yes.
for elections, right?
For election, right. So in the case of the SK, that probably was the influence.
Okay.
That was the factor that had to be considered. In the barangay, again, especially in the barm areas, we know they have a different kind of politics.
The different dynamics, yeah.
Yeah, the dynamics there. So it would be ruling families, for example.
Right.
Right? So that's an issue that we have to closely examine. Okay? Although I'm aware that in the Bangsamoro Electoral Code, there is also an anti-dynasty provision.
I see.
But that will kick in 2025
After, yeah.
when they hold their elections for the parliament.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Synchronized with our national and local elections.
Right.
In 2025. So those are the two laws that have anti-dynasty provisions.
Okay.
Okay. Careful study that should be part of the election reforms to introduce the anti-dynasty provisions in our omnibus election code. Right, to reform that's part of the reform of the omnibus election code.
Right. So was that an unforeseen or outcome, or was that in a way expected? I mean, in particular, for example, the lack of candidates for SK. Was that anticipated by anyone? And what does the law say about that? Would someone be appointed? And what would be the implications of that?
Well, the impact of that provision was not exactly discussed. Right?
Okay.
There was no discussion.
Because we're just now seeing
yes, as we are now seeing the
barangay
results.
elections have been delayed for
Right.
so many years. Yeah.
But the next action, I was told by the election officer of Baguio City, for example, that they will hold special elections in those areas.
I see.
Where they did not have SK candidates.
I see.
Or in barangays where they're also looking at and studying the uncontested posts, for example. And then complete slates. There were incomplete slates. In other words, maybe barangay captain and as well as maybe 3 or 4 kagawads would run for the election. So you still have about 3 or 4 to fill in.
Yeah.
So they're looking into that. But in the end, if they cannot fill in the positions, I think the local chief executive has the prerogative to appoint somebody to fill in the vacant posts.
That can be problematic, can it?
Maybe. So we'll have to study the impact and implications of those. But the thing is, let's say, for example, in the SK, under the SK reform law, now, is that the limit for the SK officials would be, the minimum age is 18 years old. The reason why they defined it to be 18 years old, while the SK, the youth age of 15 can vote, they cannot run for the position unless they're 18 years old. Because that's how we define our age of majority. Right? The legal age is at 18. They said when they were studying, the legislators, when they were studying it, if an SK official, let's say sitting official, is below 18 years old, he does not have any legal capacity to sign contracts, execute contracts. So under the SK reform law,
he should still be a minor,
now they are granted some budget which they can use, they can control, so that they can contract agreements or services from third parties, for example. So now they have the responsibility to manage their finances, their budgets. Right? So that's one reason why the minimum age was defined to be 18.
Yeah. What's your sense about this suggestion before? Some people were saying that maybe we should get rid of the SK, or maybe to some extent the barangay also, because but the SK in particular, because I think the intent of creating that system was to expose younger people to leadership position, train future leaders, right? But the critics have been saying that it's become opportunities to corrupt young people because of this responsibility to manage funds and other responsibilities to the city, and that therefore maybe they should be studying instead of participating in, the local governance of cities or barangay.
Well, again, it's the reason for that is youth engagement.
Right.
Right. We have to get our youth involved already at an early age.
Right.
So, for example, at
To be
Namfrel,
politically aware, and
Yes.
participate in democracy.
right.
Yeah.
So, for example, at Namfrel, we have a training program for the youth to get involved in, let's say, monitoring the performance of the barangays and maybe even the local government, the city or the municipality where they live.
Right.
Right. And they have to be capacitated.
Right.
They have to know how to monitor what are the things that they should look for. So we get them engaged at an early age and they learn the process.
Right.
In the same manner that in politics, okay, it's supposed to be non-partisan to begin with,
Right.
but that's the onset of the politics.
Right.
Sadly, that system was, of course, manipulated or even taken advantage of by certain politicians. We know that from the past.
Yeah, I want to go back to that, but what is the implications now of these one candidate running for barangay for some barangay areas? What are some of the things that you are looking at as Namfrel? Is it because of maybe just non-interest, apathy, political apathy, or is it something more nefarious as maybe some intimidation of potential candidates maybe shying away from running because maybe they don't get along with the, or is the jury still out? I mean, is Namfrel's still trying to investigate and trying to get at the bottom of things?
Let's face it, about 80% maybe of the country is run by political families.
So that's the issue that you're
That's the issue
suspecting.
that- Yes, that's what we have to dig into. A lot of people would like to run, but if
Okay.
they do not have the
If they're
connections,
afraid, if they're intimidated,
That's correct.
if they don't have the resources.
the
yeah.
barangay is supposed to be non-partisan,
Right.
right? But the reality is that these barangay officials would solicit support from the local government.
Right.
Okay? That is why they have to have a mechanism to put that together as an independent political body. After all, the role of the barangay is to implement national programs and even local programs
At the grassroots, right?
at the grassroots.
Yeah.
And they're the first
First line of government, yeah.
yes, facing the citizens, right? They're the ones who can identify the particular problems in a particular constituency, right? So we have to look at and study the mechanisms, the dynamics between the barangay and the local government. Sadly, again, these barangay officials would solicit support from the local government, from the local official, right? And that is where the thin line between non-partisanship and partisanship comes into play.
Right.
Right. So even in the SK, previously, before the SK reform law, I have a friend whose son ran in their barangay.
Okay.
Right? And at that time, it was the barangay that had control over the budget of the SK.
Oh my gosh, okay.
Right? So the barangay official approached the young lad, said, just sign it, we'll give you $1 million.
Oh my goodness.
Right? And that's where corruption starts.
Right.
Right?
So instead of teaching them about good governance, democracy,
Right.
we're corrupting them at an early age.
Right. And that's where our training program comes in.
Right.
Right. We're training them on good governance, good citizenship, introducing that program. And we're hoping to replicate that nationwide. In fact, we held our first run in February, right? And after some parties, some organizations heard about the training program, they started inquiring and they would like the same program to be run in their areas.
Well, we have to take a quick break, Lito, but before we go, maybe if you can just answer very briefly, do you think you're winning the battle on that or you're falling behind?
We're just starting. And we have to bite the bullet, right? Because we're seeing, at this day and age, especially of technology, right? We're so polarized.
Yeah.
The engagement of the youth is using electronic devices. That's where they engage, right? So we have to take advantage of that. And there's influence on the youth on misinformation and disinformation.
Yeah.
So we have to teach the youth how to really distinguish. Right? We have to teach them how to critically think.
Right.
We have to teach them how to discern, right? Those issues, what is right and what is wrong, what is misinformation and disinformation.
So that they can participate responsibly in the electoral process.
Right.